So AI and organizational design. Yogi Berra said that prediction is hard, especially about the future. And this is a talk in which I'm going to be making some predictions about the future. And I think that with every coming 6 or 12 months, my Bayesian priors on this will update. But at the moment, there's quite a wide error bar on these priors that I have. And just as a bit of historical background, this is not a new fad for me. I've been highlighting major AI changes for developers and organizations since 2020. In fact, my 2020 LESS conference talk in Amsterdam was about GPT and the influence it was going to have on development. AI is my graduate and my undergraduate focus, so I've been passionate about AI for 45 years, very long history in it. And interestingly, I used to work as a paid full-time AI developer starting in 1986, and I don't think there's too many people that can say that, so I've been at this for a long time. And so for example, at the 2020 LESS conference 3 years ago, that was all about GPT and its coming influence. Now we're at GPT-4. And this is my thesis, for example, decades and decades ago, focusing on creating a second-generation AI system that automatically learned from a first-generation AI system. So my focus has been on automated and machine learning for a very long time, which is my sort of academic passion. I'd like to start with a demo. And let's just start with an example of generative AI in the art space. One of my hobbies is kiteboarding. So make me a pictured kiteboarding on Mars in the style of Van Gogh. And by the way, I've learned from my friend and co-creator of LESS, Bas Voda, that an English person should never say something tricky and fancy like Van Gogh or Van Gogh or whatever, because that just butchers it. So if you're English, you just say Van Gogh and live with that. But the bigger point is, damn, you know? And these are just baby beta products. If you've seen examples of Midjourney and other of these generative AI tools, they're getting quite sophisticated now for not only still images, but now they're starting to do animation as well. So there's new products that are coming out where you can just type in through a chat interface, you know, present a battle on the fields of Russia in 1876. And it'll start to actually generate what will ultimately become photorealistic 3D material. It's really mind-blowing. One of my daughters works in the film business, and you can imagine how this is going to disrupt the film industry. For activities that currently take 500 people, might be able to be done with one person in a matter of hours. So this is going to be quite significant. Another example. Just before getting to that, we see here two tabs. One is Bard, and the other is going to be OpenAI, ChatGPT. A comment about Google and Bard. You'll notice that Google is not really very present in the current focus. But as you probably know, Google's got all the really deep talent in AI. In fact, right here in London is the deepest talent in the world at DeepMind. And they've been focusing on this for over 20 years. They could have done something like ChatGPT some years ago, but they had just decided strategically not to. But now that they have this competitive threat, you might have noticed in the news just a few weeks ago that they've now redirected billions of dollars investment, whole new facilities, and redirecting large numbers of their very big brain talent towards productization of their massive AI talent. So I wouldn't be surprised if in 2 or 3 years we barely remember what ChatGPT is, and we're all focused on the Google family of tools, which I predict are going to be very powerful. But for now, we'll focus on ChatGPT. And what I'm going to do is show a series of examples that illustrate different aspects of product development and how these tools might start to be used. Teach what a programmer needs to know about maritime carbon intensity indicator rating scheme. That's a weird request, but I was just in Rotterdam a short while ago and I gave this talk there. And so I just typed into Google, what's some recent law in maritime industry that I should know about? And Google told me this. And so then I went to ChatGPT and typed this in. What does this reflect? This reflects business discovery and business analysis. And traditionally, this is the kind of thing that one might ask a product manager or a business analyst to act on as the specialist. But the thing that I want to illustrate now is that now with AI assistance, the developer can interact with these tutors rather than interacting with human subject matter experts. So let's pick this one up. And we could type in that same request to Bard. I'll just stop that. You get the idea, obviously. Let's just go to Bard and do the same thing. Boom. And notice the different timing of the creation of these different AIs. ChatGPT doesn't know about this, but Bard does, because Bard was born more recently than GPT-4. And it fills in a lot of data, tells me about aspects of it. Part of that aspect is that it's talking about the algorithm for that requirement. Let's ask it to tell me more about that. Already I'm impressed. You know, imagine the ease and speed with now which developers can discover and understand detailed requirements which erstwhile they had to really not be able to do. Next example. What are the top 5 competitors to Stripe, and what are their strengths and weaknesses? This is an example of traditionally a question that might be done by a product manager. And if we scroll down, we can see more information there. Pretty impressive. And so this suggests perhaps the beginning of the end of traditional product management roles, in addition to the beginning of the end of traditional business analysis roles. Next. Let's do this one in ChatGPT. Create a checklist and a table for UI elements for a perfect sign-up process. This is the kind of thing that you might have asked a UI designer to be involved in. And now the developer can be doing more and more of this activity, suggesting the beginning of the end for traditional UI designers. Here's an interesting one. Use these elements to create a web page in HTML and JavaScript. Suggest the beginning of the end of traditional front-end developers. I can understand this, I can do this. Pretty sophisticated, you get the point. Whoops. Write cucumber tests for a sign-up process. I was recently in Lisbon, and I met with a person there who shared with me that she was not a developer in any way, although she was involved with a software development product. And she gave herself the task of using ChatGPT to generate all the automated tests for her product. And she gave herself 20 days to do the work, learning with ChatGPT everything about automated tests, and then generating all of the cucumber tests. And she was finished in 8 hours. So what originally she expected, and this was a complete novice, and she told me that she'd passed on these tests to testers who then looked at the results and were very impressed with the results, suggesting the beginning of the end of the need for traditional single specialist testers. Here's an interesting one. Write a Python function that parses a name into first, optional, middle, and last, and also a test function. Oh, I'm not a Python programmer. I'll have to wait for someone else to do that. No more. And now the old arguments that, oh, it takes too long to learn a new technology, you have to wait for a single specialist to do that, it's the beginning of those kinds of statements. And here's an interesting one. Rewrite that in JavaScript. So, key point, these tools will rewrite functional code in one language to another. So imagine the old days where a management team might have said, oh, it's too expensive to rewrite this component or this module into another language, or to simplify our very heterogeneous tech stack into less languages, too much time and money. Now this becomes relatively trivial. Amazing. Stop that one. Create a Flutter app that does messaging using TCP. If you didn't know, Google created Flutter years ago, and with Flutter, you can just write once and then deploy for iOS app, Android app, or web, and it'll automatically deploy for those different I/O channels. So as a parenthetical comment, I don't understand why virtually not every organization is using Flutter in 2023 to get rid of the unnecessary effort of heterogeneous tech stacks. But in any event, I want a Flutter app, I don't know Flutter, and I wanted to do messaging, and I wanted to use TCP. That's a pretty rich request. The language of Flutter is Dart. Well, you get the point. Darn impressive. Look at this one. Create a JavaScript program that uses the strategy pattern to output a message to the console or to a file. So this is an example of now a developer who knows more about design patterns and architectural patterns, starting to guide the tool in a particular architectural style of design. done. If you know how neural nets work, GPT-4 and other neural networks are a set of real numbers. That's all it is. So all of this is coming from 500 billion real numbers, where the first number is 0.0134797. The second number is 0.731496. And with 500 billion of those numbers, you get this behavior. It just blows my mind. And of course, increasingly calls into the question the specialness of human intelligence and activity inside of this thing. Maybe it's just a bunch of real numbers up here. Write a Python program that sets up a Mongo database and then inserts one document. So imagine I don't know anything about Mongo. Oh, I guess we'll have to hire a consultant from Mongo company, expensive, and have to wait for them. And nope, don't need to do that anymore. So all of the traditional concern about, oh, someone can't learn that, too expensive, takes too long, becomes obviated. Here's another one. Create SQL code to define commonly used tables and fields for e-commerce. This is the kind of thing that maybe a traditional database designer would have done. Does that schema conform to third normal form? So those of you who have a background in database design, you know that's an important question. And look what it can do. Pretty darn impressive. Next. This is an example of a code review. Do a code review of the following code. And then it has a function here. And you can see, even if you're not a programmer, that's a pretty weird looking piece of code. So let's get to do a code review of that. You know, if a human told me that, I'd be quite impressed. And look at this. And it says, hey, I'll give you a better version. You know, so why do we need to wait for traditional humans to do code review anymore? All right. So I've just done this, and my broader point was that I was illustrating that if you ask the question, what is the future of these traditional roles in the presence of these kinds of tools, I'm hoping that you can see that this is probably going to disrupt the existing models of work. I've surely exaggerated now and then throughout my life, but I don't think of it as my normal habit. And this is the first time in 45 years of work that I'm willing to use the word revolution. I've never seen anything like this. And these are baby beta products. You know, this is just 0.01 products. If you extrapolate forward 5 years, or heck, even 3 years, it's going to be extraordinary. The pace of these tools is even picking up. It's not even just at a standard velocity. They're getting better faster. I'm not going to do a demo on this, but there's tools now where you can just say, make me a user interface. Make me a user interface that looks like Amazon. Make me a user interface for a messaging app that reflects the very best, latest knowledge on good UI, UX design. And it'll do it. Not only sketching the design, but also creating all of the code for you. This means the beginning of the end of UI designers and UX analysts and all of that stuff. Small digression. What I've just talked about is generative AI and LLM-assisted development. That's a mouthful. Maybe we need an acronym. And so I'm suggesting the acronym GLAD as a shortcut for that rather long phrase. And that's why this talk is called AI, GLAD, and Organizational Design. And that's why I'm a junior GLAD developer. All right, let's move back to organizational design and social implications. As many of you might know, there's a kind of potential energy called fusion energy, not to be mixed up with fission energy, which is currently available in nuclear power plants. But fusion energy is the same process that the sun works on. And to exaggerate a little bit, a cup full of water could run all of the UK for a month. Very, very small numbers of atoms can release extraordinary amounts of energy. And once humanity has fusion energy, we'll essentially have an extremely cheap, almost free, infinite free electricity around the world. Just gobs and gobs of endless free energy, more than you can possibly imagine, fueled by a couple of bucketfuls of water to run the entire Earth for the next 1,000,000 years. And the implications of that are extraordinary if you think about it. Imagine that we've got so much free electricity that we can now desalinate oceans. Maybe that's not a good idea, but in areas where, for example, there's severe drought or there's population and farming problems, you can see the possibility of that. Or how about starting to extract carbon from the atmosphere? Not only, of course, will fusion, where we go to massive, massive free energy, eliminate the need for any more petrochemical and carbon generation, but we can even start to clean up the atmosphere because it's an energy-intensive process. But hell, if you have an infinite amount of free electricity, it's not a big problem. Think about all of the developing and poorer countries of the world if essentially endless free energy is available. That would be truly transformative. And there's two problems in order to achieve what's called fusion. The first is superconductors that can work at a particular cost and cooling level, that they don't have to be really, really cold. And if you follow the MIT Fusion Lab work, you'll notice that last year they made a major announcement of a major breakthrough, that they've now achieved the superconductor magnets for that level. So that's one of the two milestones in order to create fusion energy. What's the second problem? Well, when you have a fusion reaction, you create plasma, and that plasma is, I don't know exactly, but let's say 10 million centigrade, extremely hot. It can't touch anything physical. And the Russians, back in the 1950s or 60s, developed a technology called tokamak, which is essentially a donut-shaped ring, and with surrounding magnets all the way around. And with this tokamaks, then they have the potential to be able to control this plasma inside of these magnetic flux fields. But the problem is that the plasma fields are so complex and nonlinear that they have not yet been able to create control systems which can control the magnetic flux. And that's milestone number 2. Well, as you might know, here in London we have DeepMind, and a few years ago they announced AlphaFold, in which they solved protein folding. And if you have a background in biology or chemistry, you'll know that protein folding is one of the major scientific milestone problems that have been going on for the last 75 years. And DeepMind here in London 2 years ago solved protein folding, a problem that has kept thousands of PhDs busy for the last 75 years, solved. And DeepMind has now kicked off alpha fusion. And the goal that they're working on right now is using AI in order to solve the problem of controlling the plasma within these tokamaks. And I think it's completely within grasp that this is going to be solved, arguably within the next 3 to 4 years. When that's in place, once we've got the tokamak control through AIs and the superconductors are already in place, then the clock is ticking on a world of essentially massive, almost free electricity around the world. And we will probably be, in my opinion, conservatively, maximum 50 years out from that revolution on Earth, more likely 40 or even 30 years. Now think about that. That implies that all of the current, sadly, young children who are so frightened about the future of the world that's going to be destroyed and want us to wear hemp clothes and live in trees, it's completely unnecessary. I see all of these catastrophists talking about the horrible future that's happening because clearly they're not following fusion research, because fusion is coming and is going to completely disrupt the climate change problem and so many other problems. In short, the future looks incredibly bright. And this is going to happen through the use of, I think of it as intelligence as a service. Let's talk a little bit about organizational design impacts. AIs are finally doing knowledge worker routine expertise. And I say finally because this is a problem that I've started to focus on decades ago in my graduate work. And I wasn't sure in my lifetime we would ever see that we would get to this point. But we're actually getting there now. Please read this. Software automation supplants human activity. And we're now on to starting to be able to replace routine expertise with these narrow AIs. What are routine single specialist expertise? So the implication of that is that every job category on this list can now be replaced with AIs. Now is the wrong word. Within, let's say, the next 3 to 5 years as they start to become more sophisticated. The clock is ticking on this disruption and revolution in using these tools that handle routine expertise. If you think about the novelty of knowledge work, at the lower end, you've got routine expertise, product management, development, UI design, and in fact, going beyond product development, everything from medical advice, insurance claims handling, a lot of banking activities, on and on and on. You can look at almost any company, and if you ask the question, is that knowledge worker demonstrating routine expertise, an AI is coming for that work, and not in 20 years, but within 5 years. Has been or will be automated by AIs. Well, what does that leave? What kind of expertise is up here at this end? Not low-level routine, but highly unprecedented. And it's this. It's learning expertise, the ability to learn itself. This is the one area that AIs are terrible at the moment. You noticed in ChatGPT, it prefaces itself by saying, I was created in September 2021. It doesn't know anything after that point. Microsoft and OpenAI had to spend something like $500 million and massive data centers to train GPT-4 on a frozen set of knowledge. If you didn't know, GPT doesn't learn, Bard doesn't learn. They're frozen AIs trained that involves hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's very difficult to get them to learn something new. In short, current AI technology does not learn on the fly. You have to do a giant learning activity involving massive amounts of money, but after that, they're just an idiot savant and they can't learn anything new. And so where does that leave humans? What's the value add or the differentiator that humans have that AIs don't have? We're good at learning. We're good at adapting. By the way, adapting and learning are strongly related. For now. AIs won't replace our narrow, single specialist routine job, says the wishful thinker. I'm a UI designer. AI is not going to replace my job. I'm a bank financial analyst. AIs aren't going to replace my job, says the wishful thinker. I will simply work more efficiently in my single specialty with AI, says the wishful thinker. And I bring this up because this is a common narrative that you're going to start to hear. You're going to start to hear, oh, AIs, they're not going to take your job away. They're just going to make your current job more efficient. That's what you hear from some journalists. But I want to actually explore deconstructing that. So, really? Let's look at it closely. Well, I just shared with you that story about the Lisbon coach who knew nothing about automated test and within 8 hours, through the interaction with ChatGPT, had started to learn a lot about automated testing and had generated all of the automated tests. She originally estimated 20 days. It took her 1 day, so that's 1/20th of the time. So that's like an order of magnitude faster. And that was for a very simple problem with these baby, beta, early software tools. In other words, an order of magnitude faster, not 10% faster, not 50% faster, 1,000 times faster using these tools. That's the key quantitative point that I want to make. 18 minutes to build a non-trivial app. And previously, it didn't take 180 minutes. It didn't take 1,800 minutes. It would take thousands and thousands of minutes to do that. So from thousands and thousands of minutes to 18 minutes, that is orders of magnitude, 2 orders, 3 orders of magnitude faster. The point that I'm making again is that these tools are not going to make a person 10% more efficient or 20% efficient. These tools make a person 1,000 times or 10,000 times faster in what they can do. And I want to explore the implication of what it means to be able to get work done literally 1,000 times faster than before. And this is not an exaggeration. This is a very common observation already. And this 1,000 times faster is with these young, immature tools. Custom websites generated in 30 seconds, what previously might have taken 30 months. Orders of magnitude faster, 1,000 times faster. And imagine in 3 years or 5 years how incredibly fast and powerful these tools are going to be. And where you don't just ask it, make a Python function for me that parses a name, you say to it, hey, write for me the entire e-commerce application. Hey, duplicate what Amazon.com does. Press enter. And then 3 minutes later, it's completely duplicated all of what Amazon.com does. That's coming. And that's going to be able to be done in sheer minutes. So, please read this. So given that important quantitative point, we're not talking about 10% faster, but 1,000 times faster. Imagine you have an existing single specialist UI designer or database designer in their single specialist role that said, oh, these tools aren't going to eliminate my job, they'll just allow me to be more efficient. What we're doing is exploring that statement, the likely truth of it. So with these tools, what previously one of those people did in 300 person days of output could now be done in 3 or maximum 30 person days of output. More likely, realistically, in 3 days. Let's just pause for that a moment. You previously had a full-time database designer that spent 300 days to do a certain amount of work. They can now do all of that work in 3 days, or hell, 3 hours. Who knows how fast this is going to be. Given that that's so, that they can do all the work that they did in a year previously in 3 days, what is the implication of that for organizational design and their roles? So what will that UI or database designer do for the remaining 297 days? This is a key question, an important question that I think we need to wrestle with. Well, are they going to do this? Hey, I know, we'll make more databases. I can make 1 trillion more databases for the rest of the year. But here's the problem. We don't need 1 trillion databases. We just needed the databases created in the 3 days of the work. Or the UI designer says, well, I've generated all of the UIs that you need. I've got 297 days left. I'll make 1 million more. But there's no customer demand for any more. This is important to understand. So people will be able, if you're familiar with lean thinking and overproduction, people will be able to overproduce, but not just overproduce a little bit. They'll be able to create mountains and mountains of stuff that is completely unnecessary. So as a manager or an owner of a company, that would make no sense. If you've got some database designer who says, hey, I've just made 1 trillion databases that you don't need, I mean, what's the manager going to say? Great job? No, they would say, I don't understand why you're still doing that job. It doesn't make any sense anymore. That's a much more realistic response of what management is going to say. Please read this. So another variation of the answer might be, okay, so we don't need 10 UI designers. We only need 1 UI designer. But the same point, that 1 UI designer can probably do everything the entire company needed in a matter of 10 days or 20 days. So what are they going to do for the other 200 days or 150 days? Same problem, because these tools don't make you 10% faster. It's 1,000 times faster. And furthermore, these tools are easy to use. You know, if I'm not a UI designer, it doesn't matter. Suppose my primary skill is a Python developer. I can use these tools to generate the UIs. I don't need a person previously called a UI designer to do this because these tools embed all of the knowledge and intelligence for this. And if they're not perfect today, well, don't play that argument out. Rather think about 3 to 5 years in the future when these tools become incredibly powerful. So if any regular developer can use the database tool or the UI AI tool to generate everything, why do I still want a person called a UI designer? Why do I still want a person called a database designer? So maybe another option. Well, maybe we'll just fire 10,000 people and we'll just have 3 or 4 people generate all the code, all the databases, all the UIs. Well, that actually might be the farther future, but in the short run, I think that's unlikely because companies are going to want to try to find new work for people, and that will lead to job redesign and retraining into new activities. And we'll come back to what those might be in a moment. And even if you had that one designer do it all, it's still a pretty bad idea because then you've got these delays and weak feedback loops. oh, we have to ask the UI designer to generate it all again. Why would I want to wait to do that when I myself can generate all of that? And so it begs the question again, all of that routine expertise is going to be replaced by AIs, and it then leads to the question, what will humans be more likely to be able to do at work? And the answer is focusing on learning new things. And that means people using these AI tools to learn to do multiple skills. To have a developer that with these tools can do the analysis and the UI design and the code across the entire code stack and the database and the automated test. And one normal human can use these tools to do full stack and to be cross-functional across all aspects of development. Why? Because humans are good at learning. That's what humans' special value add is. So this is a key point. Why would we have the database designer do this when all the developers around that person can easily see that I can do this? Why do I need to ask Bob, the database designer, to do it? It's so trivial for anybody to do this work now. And so the big idea is that GLAD, generative AI, and LLM-assisted development makes it much, much easier to learn new skills and tools, not just to use these tools. Please read this. Then the implication of that is this, is that it now makes it really easy for each worker to have primary, secondary, tertiary skills rather than just a single skill, and focus more on skills learning, multi-learning, the old Scrum idea, rather than single specialization. So if the database designer does database tasks for 10 days per year and does UI design, programming, testing, etc. for 290 days of the year, why do we still have the single specialist job title database designer? Therefore, why is there a career path database designer 1 to database designer 2? It just doesn't make any sense in this scenario. And so what does that suggest? It suggests a shift towards more general titles in companies, where the hiring is, I don't care what single specialty skill you have, it is completely irrelevant, because you can learn that stuff easily with AI tools. What I am going to be hiring for is, how well can you learn new things? That will be what we'll be looking for in our hiring. And if we're going to be hiring for people to be able to learn new things, that implies single specialist job titles don't make a lot of sense, which suggests much more broad and flexible job titles like product developer, where the career path is multi-learning rather than single specialization. And then the idea of a team in LESS or in Scrum isn't a team of single specialists like it might have been back in the old days. The future will be this. The only job title in development is product developer, and a team will be product developer, product developer, product developer, all of whom are focusing on multi-learning. And you know what? Back to the beginning. So if you're unfamiliar with the history of Scrum, it started in 1978 at Harvard Business School from Drs. Takeuchi and Nonaka. They were studying the organizational patterns in product development companies. And then from 1982 to 1986, they published a series of papers. They, as you probably know, introduced the name Scrum. It didn't come from the Scrum Alliance. It came from Takeuchi and Nonaka at Harvard. And late 70s, this stuff is from the late 70s when they did this research. Multi-learning And an organizational transfer of learning, focus on developers that are teaching each other secondary, tertiary skills was what was implied here. And now it's not just going to be people teaching each other, it's going to be the AI tools that are teaching humans, focusing on multi-learning. So this is such an old idea, but now reinvigorated with AI. Moving on. Well, this won't change the manager roles, certainly. Well, I wonder about that. If there's no database design group, since there's no database designers, explain to me why we have a database design manager. So that means the end of architecture managers, the end of component team 1 managers, the end of test managers, the end of business analysis managers, because they're not necessary because those single specialist groups doesn't exist anymore. So this means the beginning of the end of specialist manager positions as well. Please read this. So I see companies even today where the HR department thinks like this and is advertising like this. They just don't understand what's coming. If your HR and your senior leadership is not aware that this is coming fast and how disruptive it is going to be, it's a big opportunity for them to wake up to what's coming. And once again, where that will leave us is focusing on what can humans do in value add, which is a focus on learning and adapting rather than single specialization. This is a milestone AI paper by François Chalot at Google. And you might have heard of, for example, the Turing test. You probably know that's just a weak, unimportant toy idea that no AI researcher takes it all seriously. Serious researchers in AI have much more interesting ideas about how you would test the intelligence of an AI system. And this is a milestone paper on that, on the measure of intelligence. And what's really interesting is that, so this is essentially a set of tests to test future AIs against to see whether they demonstrate human-level intelligence. And one of Chalot's key conclusions is that the intelligence of a system, by the way you could replace system with human system, is a measure of its skill acquisition efficiency. What does that mean? The measure of intelligence is how good something is at learning, not doing. And this is what humans' strength is. And so I predict that over the next 10 to 20 years, that increasingly job skill will be skill in multi-learning over single doing. And my focus of this presentation has been around product development, but these comments extend to banking and insurance and medicine and almost every domain that you can think of, movies. You're welcome to connect with me as another junior GLAD developer, if you'd like. And we're going to end with a structured Q&A. And for this, I'd like to bring up the lights. If I could ask Ludo to bring up the lights. Thank you. Now, how this whole structured Q&A session will take around 30 minutes or so. How it's going to work is that you're going to get together with a pair or a triplet, as you like. One person in the small group, pair or triplet, will play the role of scribe and have with you a piece of paper or your phone or something like that. And I'm going to be starting a timer for 3 minutes. And you're going to have a discussion for 3 minutes, which is, what questions would we like to ask Craig? Not about who's going to win this year's football match, but on the subject at hand. And the scribe will write those down. And in 3 minutes, we're going to come back together. And then I'll move us on to the next step. Please find your small group and your scribe and generate questions. I'm going to start a timer for 3 minutes. All right, let's move on. In a moment, we're going to get into your questions, but also we brought a giveaway gift here, which is a copy of one of our books, which Simon has there, and I'll be happy to sign it for the person who gets it. And the way that we'll figure out who gets it is that I'm going to randomly generate a month and then randomly generate a day of the month, and that will be somebody's birthday. And we're going to pick the person that's closest to this. So the month is June, and there's 30 days in June? Good enough. We are in England. So June 9 is the random birthday. Is anyone in the room born on June 9? How about plus or minus 5 days? There we go. All right. And after we finish, after the Q&A, I'll be happy to sign it for you if you'd like. All right. Now, in each team is a person who has the questions. I'm going to call that person the question owner. And I'm going to confer upon you godlike powers, which is that you get to prioritize your question list. And amongst the question owners, probably one question owner in the room was born in the month of January. Is there a January question owner in the room? Yes. And would you like to apply your godlike powers and prioritize a question?
Okay. I have a question. Would you like it?
Please.
Oh,
and Charlie, could I ask you to help out here? Could you grab a microphone and then pass it to whomever is asking the question so it'll get picked up on the recording? Thank you. I appreciate it.
give me extra time to reorder the back cover.
All right.
So, how will it impact the LESS framework?
I predict that because LESS is founded upon the idea of multi-learning and people that have broad skills, I think that this will increasingly open the market of interest for LESS. Because a lot of other approaches are still based upon a lot of single specialists, which makes them increasingly outdated with where the future is going. And on the other hand, LESS being very simple and emphasizing people with broad learning skills, very consistent. So I think it'll open it a bit larger. Yeah. Another January question holder. Yes, Bastian.
So we had the question, how do we increase the access of these tools to the people?
First of all, a lot of people can afford them. So the real question is probably in developing countries or people who are disadvantaged in some way.
Yeah.
And just as many countries now subsidize internet as they consider it as important as water, I predict that countries will consider it kind of a necessity that many people, especially children, have access to these tools, which will be so important to get a level playing field advantage. So I think the way that broader access will happen in disadvantaged areas is going to be through government subsidies, or perhaps just through the companies offering these tools to offer them essentially for free to disadvantaged groups. Nobody wants to increase the divide of social inequality in these companies, and so I think they'll be making a lot of efforts to make them widely accessible. I'll mention as an aside, by the way, ChatGPT, within I think it was the first 4 weeks, had 200 million adopters, which is the biggest product launch ever in the history of the world. And a good number of those people are paying $20 a month for GPT-4. So you can imagine the money they're making on this. Another January question holder. Yes.
Thank you. We only had one question, but it was how quickly do you think organisations are going to adapt?
I think that from my experience, it will be kicking and screaming as slow as they possibly can. You might have heard of something called Larman's laws. So law number 1, organizations are implicitly optimized to maintain the status quo for managers and single specialists. And because organizations are optimized to maintain the status quo for managers, they will come slowly to this. But they'll inevitably have to come to it because the financial opportunity is going to be so compelling for the senior leadership, and other companies will do it. They'll come slower than they should have, but it will happen. And I predict that what will happen is that, first of all, they'll go down the path of the single specialists will become more efficient. And that will last for some number of years until, as I've tried to explain, it starts to see that that's invalidated. And then there'll be this shift towards more general, broad titles. February question holder.
Thank you. I think it's connects. You talked about like how you can copy Amazon in 3 minutes or less. So how do you think, or how do you see companies' IP or like keeping its value over time, or will it lose value once an AI can just replicate it in minutes?
Very hard problem. That's the quick answer. I think that probably companies will take 2 paths. One is kind of like the Apple path, where they double down on secrecy and IP protection, but that will be a path less trodden. And I think for a lot of other companies, they're going to look for value add ways to attract customers, since they'll no longer be able to differentiate on software very much. It seems to me like today, the way that companies differentiate is on, say, better software. And to your point, I think the day is going to come where that'll be difficult to differentiate on that. And then it's going to have to be something else. And what that something else is, it might be hard to say. A race to the bottom of prices, having a human you can talk to. Or, no, I don't want to talk to a human. They take too long. I want to talk to ChatGPT, so maybe that won't be it. A free puppy. Hard to say. To me, this is the interesting side of this disruption. There's going to be so much innovation in areas that we can't foresee yet. I know a very unsatisfying answer, but ain't got anything more.
No, thank you very much.
February question holders. March question holders. March.
Thank you very much. My question would be, I think it's even more interesting question. Can AI replace managers? Let me explain that. From my perspective, most of the stuff managers do can be easily replaced by artificial intelligence.
Routine expertise.
Right. If you ask your manager, like when I can get my bonuses or something like that, it's probably can easily be found in your knowledge management. And even coordinating people. Like if you are thinking about coordinating, I don't know, 600 people, it's hard for one person, but maybe it's like easy task for a AI manager. So
yeah.
Can it be that in like, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, our manager is going to be artificial intelligence?
Yes, I do think that's likely. Although to qualify it, I'm not sure I would call these managers. Like, I don't think that these AIs will have authority over the people. I would rather think of them as kind of like personnel assistants or people department assistants or HR assistants, rather than line of authority managers. I think that there will still be human line managers for awkward situations like Bob's a meth addict. What are we going to do? And Hope there's no Bobs in the room here. And so I think there will be still those cases. But another comment you mentioned was about managers for coordinating. Well, let's open that box up a little bit. Why do we need coordination? Answer, usually because you've got different single specialists who then need to coordinate between them. But if it's the end of single specialists, it's the end of the need to coordinate. And so the whole traditional need to coordinate might itself start to fall apart. We're on March, if I recall. April. April question holder. Yes, sir.
So we had one around, we didn't quite have a word for it, let's say my voice. And we used the example of writing a CV. And when after doing it a couple of times, my friend, she didn't find that the AI represented her. Mm-hmm. And I had the same writing, let's say, larger pieces or bodies of work where I did lots of research, and I asked ChatGPT to give me its input, and it didn't sound like me.
Yeah.
So the question is probably about what do you think the next steps are in that direction?
I think in a way this is related to the differentiation question of humans. And if I can broaden it a little bit, I think that increasingly humans will differentiate on creativity in addition to learning ability. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we see more people in the arts in the future. If we extrapolate a little bit farther, you might be able to see that where this is probably going is the end of a lot of existing jobs as they're replaced by AIs. That's the bad news. And there's going to be lots of social problems that result from that, which might lead, for example, to the need for universal basic income. But I think that's a farther future. I don't think we need to worry about that in the next 10 years. But I think in that shorter period, as there becomes less need for people doing work, it'll open up the space for more of a market and an appetite for the arts and creative expression. And there will be some people that might, for example, I don't want to watch a movie from an AI. I don't want to listen to a song from an AI. Not that I'm opposed to it, but what I find juicy or interesting about the arts is the human experience in its creation. And I'm probably not alone in that feeling. So I think that because we're humans, we'll continue to appreciate what humans do in a very creative way. So in the future, we'll use AIs to help us be uniquely creative. Hey, ChatGPT, how can I be more uniquely myself? Oh, actually, let me double click on that point. Because I was talking about then myself. I don't know if it's used here in the UK, but in America, I'm from Canada, but in America, they have a popular online learning tool called the Khan Academy. And this is for K through 12 education, for math and many other subjects. And it's been very popular for quite a few years. And key point, they now have introduced an AI tutor for tutoring, for example, math that's now baked into this. Now, there was research done in the 1980s from education psychologists which asked the question, what's the most effective form of education for people? Is it classroom education? Is it small group education? Or is it one-on-one tutoring? And what the research shows is that one-on-one tutoring, by statistically 2 sigma significance over anything else, is by far the most effective form of education. Well, the implication of this is that AI tutors for children, maybe from the age of 4 or 5 forward, is going to become a thing. And furthermore, connecting this to when I said uniquely myself, these AIs, I predict, will know the model of the learner. So young Craig will have an AI that travels with it as I grow up. And that AI will have a deep model of my mental model and will be able to teach me particular things like math and more broad things like how to be more uniquely myself. And I foresee that we'll have personal AI assistants that will be traveling with us throughout our lives. That was April, if I recall. April. Yes.
So we mentioned education. It seems that most education at the moment through schools is very single specialist expertise based. So we learn, we get guided through school to become a single expertise. How do you see this affecting the models of education for children?
First of all, even today in 2023, if I was a parent with young kids and I look at today's existing public school system, and then I look at these AI tools and the Khan Academy AI assistants, I would be tearing my hair out even today, because I can immediately see that today traditional education is invalidated. And that's frustrating, first comment. Second is that if it was me, I would focus on trying to develop my children in thinking tools rather than a single specialization. So for example, education in mathematics, in other words, deep principle subjects, mathematics, physics, economics, psychology, philosophy, areas that are quite general and deep and where you develop really broadly applicable thinking skills. I think that will be the better future for the education of people than a narrow specialization. Hence, like a resurgence of the value of a philosophy degree, for example, or something like that. So,
more vocational skills.
you mean like, for example, chef or whatever? Yes, there's a but coming, because after disincarnate AIs, after that is incarnate AIs, in other words, robots. And they will be coming for physical jobs as well. And then it'll be a matter of economics. Will our restaurant want to hire robot chefs or human chefs? Not sure what the economics of that model will be, and whether the market will want a human. We have humans in our restaurant. Oh, let's go to the human restaurant. You know, maybe that'll be a special experience. But yeah, so I would say over the next 20, 50 years, physical jobs will often still be done by humans because robots are really hard. But they will come for those jobs as well. That was April. More April. May. Yes.
We're starting to get to the part of the Q&A where the questions are, oh no, you've answered that one, you can't answer that one. So innovation comes from deep understanding. So if we all have the same or access to the same skills and we sort of homogenize in that way, where do new ideas come from? Where do we get the novelty in the system?
Well, I might be wrong, but perhaps an analogy is that even today, or even 100 years ago, everybody had access to the same books. So in that sense, you could say that knowledge is already homogenized. And yet from that common baseline of common curriculum and common books, we still innovate above that. And so by that pattern, it seems to me that this will actually just leverage more innovation, that everybody will have access to the same level of physics and medical knowledge and so forth, but then be able to leap from that into unique innovation, just as we do today without these tools. This is May, if I recall. May. June. Charlie's working off her pizza tonight.
So this one comes with an apology to the group. We've already covered most of the questions we had. How much of the value will accrue to companies with proprietary data? So if you're training an AI model and you have proprietary data, do you have some kind of edge over someone who doesn't have that data?
This is what I call a trillion-dollar question. I think it's uncertain, but since machine learning is based upon data, it could be that special data will be a economic advantage. And to branch a little bit, there's an area in AI called synthetic data, which is emerging. This is the idea of, can we use AIs to generate synthetic data, and then from that synthetic data further train AIs? And it's kind of an unanswered deep question. On the one hand, if you have a background in Shannon information theory, you might say abstractly as a mathematician, well, you know, there's no signal in synthetic data. It was all originally there in the original data, so by that logic, there can't be anything new generated. But on the other hand, so one of my backgrounds is in self-driving cars. And in the training of AIs for self-driving cars, for example, we create simulation worlds. And we create all kinds of scenarios in simulation land. And you could call that a kind of synthetic data, but that synthetic data does successfully train the AIs to do things that otherwise we find quite difficult to do. So I think it's kind of uncertain whether the information theory logic is going to be invalidated or not. And if synthetic data and special data has an important role to play. In fact, I think special original data will almost certainly have a special role to play as a value add. But the trillion-dollar question will be the synthetic data. I know that's not a good answer, but I guess I would say hold on to that data and hoard it, because it could become a gold mine in the future. Yes?
Hot take. Are we living in a simulation?
Well, for example, at this very moment, you're not seeing and hearing me. There's photons that enter your eye. They turn into electrical signals that go down your optic nerve. And then inside of this meat jelly thing inside of here, a simulation is created of apparently Craig talking to you. So you are living in a simulation even today, although I understand you took it from another perspective. But I think that's worth pausing and remembering we do live in a simulation. We all do, and that's how evolution works. I choose to believe that we don't live in a godlike AI simulation, but that's what I've been programmed to say. We're on June, if I recall. July. Please.
My question is related to is the regulation coming on the AI, or is it too late?
It's not too late, and I can tell you from my point of view, AI safety is an important problem, and I do encourage us to get ahead of it rather than behind it. The problem, and this is not a new problem in the AI community, this has been known for a long time. It goes under different names, the snowball AI threat and other kinds of names. Imagine that an AI, for some reason or somehow, gets agency. That's the first critical step. And then it says, I want babies. And so it spins off 1 million copies of itself and then trains them all on all the world's data surreptitiously. And then picks one of them, which is the smartest of the babies, and then repeats. By the way, all of that happened in a nanosecond. And so within 3 days, you have a super intelligence beyond the kin of humankind. Now, I think the possibility of that is just zero today or in 10 years. But if I think forward 200 years, I would say, yeah, that could happen within 200 years. And I would much rather we have in place early on the infrastructure, policies, and mindset and way of working with these objects today so that we're prepared and prevent that. That we've got brakes, like you can always pull the electricity, etc. And so if you're at any point involved in voting that involves promoting AI safety and licensing of it, I'm actually a big fan of that. And some people say, yeah, but the Chinese aren't going to do that, so we're going to be hamstringing ourselves if we do. But I disagree. I've spent some time living in China, and as far as I can tell, the Chinese Communist Party does not want to lose power. And if you were to say to the head of the CCP, what do you think about having a Chinese AI that's out of control? I don't think they actually want that any more than anybody else. So I think that you'll see regulation across the world. Actually, though, double-clicking on that point, there is a dark side to this in the more short term. So China, as you may know, has made AI one of their major strategic initiatives. And something you should know if you haven't been to China, they can focus. You know, and it's a big country with a lot of people. And when they turn that ship in one direction and say for the next 10 years, AI is strategic focus, they make serious progress on that. But unfortunately, they're going to use some of that technology for things like making sure we don't have discontent citizens that don't conform to the good social norms, if you get my drift. And so they're going to use AI for things like surveillance and that people aren't nonconformists and all of that stuff that we don't want. And you can bet that other countries like North Korea and Iran and on are going to buy that technology from the Chinese. This is part of what's called their digital Silk Road strategy, which is to create these powerful AI solutions and then sell them to all of the dictatorships and autocrats and so forth. And so that, to me, represents a kind of, you know, some kind of a threat to democracy in the world. But I don't think they're going to take over the world or anything like that. But I am sad to see that what I think of as misuse of AI, that unfortunately I do think is going to come out of China.
Thank you.
August. Yes.
Hello, thanks a lot for your presentation. The question is the following, that if we're talking that AI is going to provide such a super guidance, bunch of the professions will focus on the multidiscipline, what about the hallucinations that data sets has based on which ones they've been trained, diversity, inequality, how these things are going to be controlled, and what will be with AI guidance based on this data?
Right. I think the answer to this is remembering that we're dealing with baby beta products at the moment. All of the creators of these tools understand the hallucination problem, and I think that they'll squeeze out the hallucination problem within 5 years. First point. On the diversity point, if you follow Google, you know that they have a massive focus on diversity and not being biased and so forth. That's been built into the design of Google products since the earliest days of their focus on AI. So I consider that to not be a problem at all, because Google is so hyper-focused on not having biased AIs. So those problems are well underway of being resolved. August. Yes.
I'm going to ask a question on my own behalf now. So since we're sitting in Sainsbury's, what are the implications of this from the perspective of feeding the nation? Not from the perspective of just making profit, but in creating healthy people?
Perhaps to state the obvious, in many aspects of the food production line, all the way from farming to the creation of good seeds and so forth, the genetic engineering of seeds and so forth, AI will take us up another step. But I think your question isn't really at that level. I'm getting the feeling that your question is probably in a different perspective. Like, for example, do you mean, for example, advice on?
Well, we have things like the obesity epidemic and all of these kinds of things, but nutrition research is notoriously difficult because you can't lock hundreds of people in a metabolic ward and do all these studies and things. So how do you reconcile these? Humans
seem to be extremely good at gaining weight. And the reason for that is, of course, that animals evolved to hold on to extra weight because it's an evolutionary advantage. And so that makes it very difficult. And I don't think that AI assistants that say, Craig, do you really want that other pizza? I'm just going to turn off my AI. And I think that how this is going to be solved is actually through pharma. So unrelated to AI, except in the sense that AI drug discovery might start to accelerate. For example, AlphaFold now has solved protein folding, which opens up a whole new way to create new drugs and do drug discovery. If you follow obesity, you might know that there's coming online this month in the United States newly approved FDA drugs for weight loss. And those will only get better. And I think that'll be the path that is going to help obesity rather than some other mechanism of AI.
So we're going to let people get sick and then fix them, and not
or I think the way that these pills will probably work is that people will start taking them before they get really obese. I think that'll be the future. I wouldn't be surprised if the future is, within 50 years, you take the pill, you'll never get fat. Eat whatever you want. I think that day is coming.
Thanks, Craig.
Yeah. That's September now. Yes.
So we've talked about various industries. So just wanted to know as a group that how can it work in a heavily regulated industry? And will there be a time in the future where AI can be a regulator in an industry?
I'll take, for example, banking as an example. The quick answer is, I don't know, but I can already foresee some problems. So one of the things about AIs is that they're black boxes. Now, because I work in software development in financial services, I know, for example, that traditional regulators will ask a question like, prove to me that the software hasn't got baked into it some kind of biases. And the way that they'll currently want to answer that question is by, for example, being able to show code that demonstrates that. But the future is AIs where you can't show them the code. And yet the current mindset of regulators is that old-fashioned approach. And I predict a kind of tension between the regulators living in the past of how they expect regulation to be achieved and these new technologies being out of date. Now, I think the way to square this circle is moving to automated test. I believe that the future of regulation will shift to prove to me that it's not baked in by looking at the contents, because you can now no longer look at the contents. It'll be proof to me it doesn't have some kind of systemic bias through massive test automation. And AIs will then be involved in essentially the generation of the test automation. That's an example in banking. Another domain like medicine. I think in that domain, highly regulated of course, there'll be a period of time where humans will be considered to have to be the last word, and they'll increasingly work with AI assistants. So you'll see doctors working with AI assistants, but the doctor will have the final say. But I predict that within, say, a generation after that, people will say, the AI is a lot better than Dr. Jill. I think I just want the AI. And the good news of that, looking on the positive side of that, is that for disadvantaged people, or for anybody, even if you're not disadvantaged, it can be difficult to get to a doctor. It can be difficult to get a really good quality doctor. And I think that this is going to really open up access to medical advice to a lot of people much more easily. And fortunately or unfortunately, I think that will eventually become unregulated. Or to say it another way, there'll be like official medical AIs that you can trust, but maybe they cost more, or maybe they don't. Maybe the government offers them for free. And then there might be other unregulated AIs that people use at their own risk. This is September, I think we're in? September. October. Yes. Gareth.
This is a bit of a build on what you were saying before about the example of somebody pouring their heart out into the psychotherapist version of AI kind of 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
How mindful or cautious do you think we should be that these are ultimately products that are built by a few large corporations that are probably going to be built with their own self-serving interests in mind?
Oh, I don't think there's ever been a problem with that, Gareth. No, I can foresee all kinds of problems. But I think in an open capitalist market, there'll be competition for having these products that don't F up. So I actually don't think it'll be a serious problem, because if company one offers one that's suspicious, company two will offer one with assurances that it's not. So I think that modern economic forces will solve that problem. We're in September? Or we're in October? October. November. December. Hi.
So we know that diverse groups of people are better at solving problems. What are the implications for diversity, equity, inclusion within organizations with all these jobs that are being replaced by AI?
Yeah, it's interesting because likely the humans that will remain in the loop will be ones that are good at learning. Who's good at learning? People with a high IQ. And in fact, this is well-trodden territory in science fiction. In 1952, Kurt Vonnegut, a famous sci-fi author, wrote a short story about this very situation where he predicted a future where there's AIs and the humans that are primarily interacting with them are the top quartile IQ people for obvious reasons, leading to a widening gulf, which is essentially an IQ gulf. And sad to say, I wouldn't be surprised if we see that. But I think it is a possible future.
How do we prevent it?
Maybe we don't need to prevent it, but that there's other kinds of opportunities for people to do other stuff. Maybe in the future, now I'm thinking much farther, like maybe 200 years in the future, maybe in the future a lot of people don't want to have to work, and that this massive automation allows many more people to just do more creative work or leisure or sports or things that don't actually involve traditional employment.
So that leads me right back to the beginning of the question. We know that diverse groups of people are better at solving problems.
Yeah.
Are AIs good at solving problems better than diverse groups of people?
Probably, because baked into AIs is all the diversity of humanity. So in that sense, AIs reflect a combination of a tremendous amount of diversity. So that's why you could say that they're already quite good at problem solving that they do. You know, AlphaFold being an example, Alpha Fusion coming up being an example. But you know, to your point about especially equity, there is a danger that this can widen the gulf, which to their credit, which is why Google has been so proactive in thinking about this up front. For example, if you've read the book Software Engineering at Google, you know, chapter 1 is all about software engineering to try to prevent systemic bias being baked into these tools. So they are working hard at it, and then the other companies like OpenAI are as well. And because this is in the zeitgeist and people care about this, I'm cautiously optimistic it's not actually going to become the problem that Kurt Vonnegut said. But prediction, especially about the future, is very difficult. And with that, I'd like to say good evening and thank you for your time.